I'm David Gordon Koch, reporting from Moncton for the NB Media Co-op. Today, we're getting an update on the story of Skyler Sappier, the 28-year-old Wolostoqey man who died of COVID-19 at the St. John Hospital in January last year. His death came 2 days after being transferred from the St. John Regional Jail, where he became ill during a COVID-19 outbreak. In May of this year, the jury in a coroner's inquest found that Sappier, a father of two, died of natural causes. The family says that Sappier suffered from medical neglect at the St. John Regional Correction Center, and they plan to launch legal action against the jail. Chief Ross Perley of Neqotkuk, or Tobeek First Nation, has also renewed calls for an Indigenous-led inquiry into systemic racism that he says is on full display in today's justice system. For more on this story, I'm speaking with Data Brainanta, who writes for the NB Media Co-op and recently won the Brian Beaton Annual Prize in Journalism for Justice. His new article about the coroner's inquest and the family of Skyler Sappier in their fight for justice has just appeared on nbmediacoop.org. Thanks for joining us, Data. First of all, you've been working to raise awareness about the family's ongoing fight 4 months after the end of the coroner's inquest. How did you get involved?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, David. So it all started with the March for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Fredericton. Skyler's sister Rianne was there with Martha Martin, who's the mother of Chantal Moore. So Chantal Moore was the 26-year-old Indigenous woman killed by a policeman in Edmundston, New Brunswick in 2020. So at the march, Rianne and Martha made an announcement about the inquest, calling on people in St. John to show support and love for the family. So I came up and coordinated with Martha and Rianne. We set up a Facebook event to get people to show up. And on a personal level, I also have two sons, and I couldn't imagine losing them and then having to go through the whole legal process just to find out what actually happened. So I empathize with them, and I believe a show of support and love would definitely help. Mm-hmm. And also it is important because the city of St. John and this province is also home to us all, to me, including myself. And what happened to Skyler shows that this home is basically not safe for all of us. Maybe to just some people who are very privileged. So I want people to be aware of this and do something to make this place safe for everyone. So finally, I see the situation also is kind of like a remnant of centuries-old colonialism that prevents people from being equal. So that somehow there's a group of traditional rulers, let's say, that can preserve their supremacy, while the historically marginalized and exploited would remain that way, while their culture and arts are being used to kind of like adorn their museums and mansions, if you know what I mean. So I have a vested interest to shake this off, to change the community that I live in into a better, kinder, and a more compassionate one.
The New Brunswick Coroner Service held an inquest that heard testimony from 23 people. You attended those hearings. Can you walk me through the process? How does it work?
It was also my first experience attending an inquest. So an inquest is basically just public presentations of evidence to investigate questionable deaths. In this case, under the custody of jail, the death of Skyler Sappier. And as I noted in the article, the chief coroner stated that it wasn't meant to assign blame, the entire process, but to investigate and prevent similar deaths in the future. And I actually attended it not to primarily write an article or a report, but to show support to the family. So what happened on the first day, I was actually quite impressed by how the coroners and the prosecutors who will lead the inquest, as well as the courthouse staff and security, they were all very friendly to the family. Mm. And this initially gave me the high hopes that the outcome will be favorable towards justice. Two prosecutors came out first thing in the morning, especially to welcome the family after they did the smudging and drumming ceremony that was held outside. Because of my appearance too, they thought that I was member of the family. But perhaps I should also note that I am not an indigenous Canadian person from New Brunswick, but rather I'm a recent newcomer from Indonesia. And back to the inquest itself, as you mentioned, David, there were a number of witnesses. Um, the family couldn't address the witnesses directly during the inquest, but they were given cards by the prosecutors to write down questions for the prosecutors to ask. And the family was also allowed to lay cedar leaves on the floor, like ceremonially, and had a drumming ceremony in the room. So again, my hopes were high because I've never attended a court proceeding where there was so much warmth and positivity in the first days. Unfortunately, the family was ultimately disappointed with the outcome, as the death of Skyler Sappier was deemed natural by the jury.
And we'll talk more about that in a moment and about the recommendations that the jury came up with. But first, the article that you've written states that understaffing and underfunding were both mentioned by some of the witnesses from the correctional center, from the jail, and from the hospital. But as you say, negligence was not admitted. So can you elaborate on that? Talk about some of the testimony that you heard during this inquest.
So some witnesses, the correctional officers, nurses, and doctors, they were kind of hinting and mentioning that they were working under relatively poor conditions. There is some understaffing problem there in their workplace. And in the first part of the inquest, we mostly heard from correctional officers as well as the nurses that came regularly to the jail. Like I mentioned in the article, the general take from them, from the correctional staff, is that they checked on him, they treated him appropriately, the best they can, no neglect, but his condition just rapidly deteriorated. Okay, and the next groups of testimonies comes from nurses and doctors at the hospitals. The general theme there was, they found him already at level 2 triage at ER, meaning essentially that he needed immediate attention from a doctor, or at the latest within 15 minutes that the doctor should see him. One doctor, when asked by the prosecutor, even commented that it was unusual that he was left by himself at the ER without anyone accompanying him. And later on, the two correctional officers who took him to the hospital later explained that they had to leave him at the emergency ward because they had to go back to the jail to take care of his paperwork. And at the end of the inquest, we also heard testimonies from higher officials and some experts.
And on that note, you describe one scene in the article from the hearings where Staff Sergeant Stefan Pulio gives his testimony by video conference. He's described in your article as an officer with access to all the correctional center's security video and records. And the family had a question specifically for him. Can you describe what happened?
So he was the one who conducted an internal investigation on the correctional institution surrounding Skyler Sappier's death. He's basically summing up the testimonies of the correctional officers, I would say, and gave some explanation on how the system works. He's also the one who has access to all the records and videos at the jail. So naturally, the family addressed that big questions to him. The family had heard from the community that after he died, that Skyler was not given the treatment he needed when he was at the jail, that he banged on the cell door asking for help and no one came. And I was there actually sitting behind the family when they handed the prosecutor the card with that questions. Prosecutor looked uneasy. His face was uneasy, and he came back to the family and told them something like, they want to answer this, right? Like they will try to defend their institutions. But the family insisted that the question will be asked. I was actually surprised that he even said it. I thought if he thinks there's something that's being hidden, that it is his job to bring that out to the open to the public. But the prosecutor did ask the questions, and Pulio responded that the claim was unfounded because, according to Pulio, the records didn't confirm it. But then again, no inmates were called to stand as a witness, which has raised suspicions that something is being hidden from the public. This is also why it's ironic that the chief coroner repeated at each opening of the day of inquest that this process is about us as a community working to bring light to this incident. Because, like it or not, this province, this city is quite small in populations. The degree of separation is quite low. And that's also how the family found out and heard about what happened to, Skyler Sappier. So if you don't actually try your utmost, your sincere utmost to thoroughly investigate and bring transparency, the community will know that you're hiding something and that you're just basically continuing the injustice and discrimination, because there's these certain members of the community that are deprived of truth, and fair treatment, while there's few privileged people that can actually buy their way into anything.
So there's definitely a sense that the inquest did not get to the bottom of this story. You note that no inmate was called to stand as a witness. The family, as mentioned, has alleged that there was medical negligence on the part of the jail, that Skyler had been banging on his cell, asking for medical attention. Martha Martin, the mother of Chantel Moore, who, as you said, this is the mother of the 26-year-old Indigenous woman who was killed by a policeman in Edmundston in 2020, in a case that really sparked a lot of calls for an inquiry into systemic racism in this province. She has also questioned why inmates weren't brought in to give testimony. And so I guess this brings us to the larger significance of this case, which comes after Rodney Levi, the man from Metapanegyag First Nation, who was also shot and killed by a police officer just days after Chantel Moore's death in 2020. So this is a long simmering issue, and I mean that's only to name a couple of cases from the past couple of years. But in Indigenous communities, there's a sense, I think, that the justice system on many levels fails First Nations people. Could you comment on how the Sappier family sees the case in this context?
I believe the family eventually felt the same way. They actually get together with some families of victims of injustice that experience similar cases with them. Now, I don't want to kind of represent the Sappier family's view in this opportunity, but I think it's safe to say that they basically just want to see justice served, in the sense that the process will be carried out in good faith and transparently, to present them the truth regarding what happened on the days leading up to their beloved Skyler Sappier's death. They want the truth to be brought to light, basically, and what actually happened to Skyler Sappier, and if anyone made a mistake in not treating him right, for example, let that be known. Would they expect more than just an acknowledgement or an apology? I don't know. That depends on the family, right? But I think the inquest, what happened last like 4 months ago, by not bringing important witnesses such as fellow inmates, was a missed opportunity to bring a conciliatory and satisfying resolution to the family. Now, their own vision, the family and Martha, when I spoke with them, I've also mentioned about restorative justice. Now, at first, when I heard from them, I didn't know what it was, to be honest. But I did a little bit of a research. There's even a page about restorative justice on the provincial website. I found out that it's a more holistic justice method that involves acknowledgement and participations of the offenders in admitting their mistakes and working together with all parties involved, all stakeholders, they call it. So the aim is to make things better and prevent similar mistakes from happening in the future. And this process involves an application of indigenous practices and teachings.
Describe how the family reacted when the jury delivered the verdicts for the inquest that Sappier had died of natural causes, and to the recommendations that the jury put forward.
Yeah, so the media covered this. They reported the disappointment and sadness. Dora Sappier, for example, Skyler's mom, when the recommendation and verdict was read by the jury, she walked out of the room and said that, he commented in the one of the news piece that there's nothing natural about that, because the verdict is just natural death. And Rian, for example, the one of the sister who's kind of like artistically talented, he sang and drummed to express her, frustration and disappointment. And I think they knew the decision in advance because the coroners and the prosecutors actually had a closed door meeting with the family earlier that day. Yeah. And after the whole process kind of ended, the family told me that they wanted to go to the Black Beach here in St. John, because I was told by Martha that beach is healing, for them. So I took them there and they did their ceremonies. They threw tobacco, they sang, they drummed, and that's how they did, to heal themselves. As for the recommendation itself, I wrote in my article that these recommendations included very little feedback from the family. Sierra, who's one of Skyler's sister, mentioned that she's disappointed because many of their recommendation was not accepted. And like I mentioned earlier, the recommendations proposed by the Sappiers included culture training by elders and blanket exercise to promote empathy towards indigenous people among correctional officers. The jury's recommendation touched more on procedural improvements like record keeping, logistics, and staffing, basically things of this nature, without any reference, in my opinion, to behavior or relationship between staff and inmates. So Martha Martin, the mother of Chantal Moore, friends of the family, whose daughter was killed by a policeman in 2020, commented that the big question is whether even this recommendation will be implemented. Yeah, it's also actually interesting to note how the mood of the staff changed on the final day. I was told by the security, one of the security there, to tell the family to not do the drumming in front of the door. They just changed 180 degrees, from the first day being so nice. After the verdict is, read, family is not happy, they become just regular security with, stern face. So I told this security person, I'm not the family, I'm just a supporter, and it's not my place to tell them what to do. So in short, I personally got a glimpse of what it's like to be treated by this system. I feel like I can see myself as Skyler, speeding at the security guard. Yeah.
Right, the spitting at the security guard. I think it bears mentioning, just going to my notes here, the question of why Skyler Sappier was in jail at this point in the COVID-19 pandemic anyway. And I have one report here that says he was in jail after his probation was revoked for an incident that occurred while he was accessing mental health care. And you alluded to this incident that may have involved spitting on a security guard. Can you just briefly explain?
Yeah, for sure. This incident where he's spat on the security guard, according to the account that I heard from Sierra, one of his sister, happened at the hospital when he's trying to get some support for his mental health problem. Yeah, and I heard about this when Sierra is giving account to a journalist who comes from Halifax. even the journalist made a comment when she heard about this, like he's not supposed to go to jail because of that, because of trying to get mental health help. And unfortunately, that put him back to jail because the incident becomes an assault charge that's also considered as a breach of probations and put him back to jail.
And
So
effectively a death sentence, tragically.
unfortunately, that leads to that.
And now, Data, you're working to raise awareness about the family's ongoing fight in the aftermath of this coroner's inquest. Briefly, how can people support the family?
Thank you. Yeah. So as I noted in the article, the family is raising funds to launch a lawsuit against the jail. Now, to me, a lawsuit on this case will be an opportunity to bring to light the problems, not to lay blame or persecute anyone or institution, but so that some sort of a resolution, a reform will come out of it. So it is an effort to create a better, safer, and more humane New Brunswick, or to be more appropriate, better Wabanaki. And the family is fundraising to cover lawyer fee for civil lawsuit. Now, people can help with that. That would be much appreciated, I'm sure, by the family. But I also invite people to do more than just giving money, and more importantly, to challenge themselves to do, what deeds they can do to express solidarity and correct the wrong in the system. Another important thing I should point out, it is also not easy to get the court record. Um, that also means the family actually it's not easy for the family to get the court record. Apparently, they have to pay thousands of dollars to get the record made and printed. The Toby chief, Ross Perley, agreed to help pay the cost, according to one of Skyler's sister, although we have not had the record yet at this point. And to me, this is actually quite ridiculous because I think the record should be a public record.
Hmm.
And there's a journalist from Halifax that I mentioned earlier. I got to chat quite a bit with some journalists at the court there. She told me that in Nova Scotia, the court records will be available on the website the next day. So seems like it's kind of backward here, unfortunately.
Hmm. We'll share a link to the GoFundMe page that that the family has to help cover legal fees. Finally, Data, just briefly, want to acknowledge your recent award, the Brian Beaton Annual Prize in Journalism for Justice, and to congratulate you. Your work has spanned several topics: housing, Palestine solidarity, the land back movement, and more. What motivates you to do this kind of in-depth writing and on a voluntary basis?
Yeah, so it's for the exact same reason that I mentioned above. This province has become my home. So I see myself and just working to improve and fix my home, basically. Just like, people fixing their roof and deck, so that they can enjoy a comfortable and safe shelter. And I see myself that I have a vested personal interests in a government that's able to provide affordable and quality housing and public transport for me as well as for everyone. And also a government that's globally and domestically promoting peace and friendship instead of, like pushing for wars or resource exploitations. I think we have to challenge the mindset of doing things only for money. I think it has created a lot of problems and destructions in the world. And that's actually what happened, in my opinion. It's what happened in the correctional facility. They're just doing their jobs, They don't step beyond that. There's not much compassion that you can see because people are just sticking to their jobs. It is actually, I found, more liberating and humane to work for a purpose instead of for money. I mean, everybody needs money, but often we worship it like it's an omnipotent savior, instead of mere means of exchange or a form of energy. So my day job, fortunately for me, allows me to pay bills. I'm just trying to follow the old union advice regarding time management, like 8 hours sleep, 8 hour work, paid work, and 8 hour solidarity works. Then there's also the weekend.
Mhm.
So on that note, I also would like to thank NB Media Co-op team for the award. Although I only met Brian Beaton once, I read about his work and dedications. Appreciate if you can share a link to in memory of him there. There's an article on that. He is committed to indigenous cause and the environment. So it is an honor to receive an award named after a dedicated activist whom I respect very much. I do hope this award will raise a little bit of my credential so that I can more easily ask people for an interview. I want to also specifically thank the New Brunswick Media Co-op editors like you, like yourself, who have checked and proofread my article and turned them into worthy pieces for publication. And in this opportunity, I also would like to mention that I donate the award money to give another push to the wheel by donating it to the fundraising effort by the Skyler's family. And that's to be done in memory and in the spirit of Brian Beaton. Thanks.
Well, congratulations again, Data, on the award and for all your work. And thanks for speaking to us today about your latest article.
Thank you, Wally One.
And I've been speaking to Data Brainanta, who writes for the NB Media Co-op and recently won the Brian Beaton Annual Prize for Journalism for Justice. And you can read his latest article on nbmediacoop.org. I'm David Gordon Koch. Thanks for joining us today.